Sarah Martinez thought she knew her husband of 12 years. She thought she knew their home, their routine, their son. But sometimes the people closest to us harbor the darkest secrets, and sometimes the help we invite into our homes brings danger we never saw coming. What started as a desperate attempt to balance work and motherhood would end with police sirens in her driveway, and a truth so shocking it would shatter everything she believed about the man she married. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Martinez had always prided herself on being in control. As a senior marketing director for a Fortune 500 tech company in Austin, Texas, she managed million-dollar campaigns, led teams of 30 people, and could negotiate contracts that would make seasoned executives sweat. But none of that prepared her for the chaos that was about to engulf her perfectly ordered life. The trouble began on a Tuesday morning in late September. Sarah was rushing through their modern two-story home in the hills of Lakeway, trying to get 7-year-old Ethan ready for school, while simultaneously reviewing quarterly reports on her tablet. The house, with its floor-to-ceiling windows and sleek marble countertops, usually felt like a sanctuary. That morning, it felt like a pressure cooker. "Mom, I can't find my science project," Ethan called from upstairs, his voice carrying that particular note of panic that only children can master. Sarah glanced at her phone. 7:43 a.m. Her presentation to the board started at 9:00 a.m. sharp, and she still needed to drop Ethan off, fight Austin traffic, and somehow transform from frazzled mother to confident executive in the span of an hour. "Check your backpack, honey," she called back, though she knew it wouldn't be there. Ethan had inherited her perfectionist tendencies, but not her organizational skills, a combination that led to frequent morning disasters. Her husband Marcus emerged from their bedroom, adjusting his tie with practiced precision. At 42, he still carried himself with the confidence of the former college quarterback he'd been, though his dark hair now showed distinguished streaks of silver at the temples. As a partner at one of Austin's most prestigious law firms, he was used to high-pressure situations, but lately the pressure seemed to be coming from all directions. "Found it," Marcus announced, holding up a shoebox volcano that looked suspiciously like it had been assembled in 10 minutes the night before. It was in the garage. Sarah shot him a look. They both knew she'd been the one to help Ethan with the project while Marcus worked late again. It was becoming a pattern, one that was starting to wear thin on their marriage. "Thanks," she said curtly, grabbing her coffee mug and laptop bag. "Can you take him today? I've got the Johnson presentation, and if I'm late, I can't," Marcus interrupted, not looking up from his phone. "Morrison wants me in early to prep for the Henderson deposition. You know how important this case is." Sarah felt the familiar knot form in her stomach. Everything was always important in Marcus's world. His cases, his clients, his career trajectory. When had her needs started coming second? When had their son's needs started coming second? The Henderson case had been consuming Marcus for months. It involved a high-profile corporate embezzlement scandal that could make or break his chances of becoming a senior partner. Sarah understood the pressure he was under, but understanding didn't make the constant juggling act any easier. "Fine," she said, though it wasn't fine at all. "I'll figure it out." Ethan bounded down the stairs, his backpack bouncing against his small frame. At 7, he was all energy and curiosity, with Sarah's dark eyes and Marcus's stubborn chin. He was a good kid, smart, funny, and surprisingly empathetic for his age. But he required attention that both parents were struggling to provide. "Are we going to be late again?" Ethan asked, sensing the tension that seemed to permeate their mornings lately. "No, baby," Sarah lied, ruffling his dark hair. "We're going to make it just fine." But as she rushed him out to her silver BMW SUV, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that nothing was fine. The pressure at work was intensifying. Her boss, Janet, had made it clear that the next round of promotions would go to those who could prove their unwavering commitment to the company. With 3 other directors vying for the same VP position, Sarah couldn't afford any missteps. The drive to Westlake Elementary was a blur of traffic lights and anxious glances at her phone. Sarah's mind raced through her presentation notes while Ethan chattered about his upcoming soccer game. She loved listening to him talk. His excitement about small things reminded her of simpler times. But today, she could barely focus. "Mom, you're not listening," Ethan said, with the directness that only children possess. Sarah caught his eyes in the rearview mirror and felt a pang of guilt. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. Tell me again about the game." But even as she tried to engage, part of her mind was already in the boardroom, anticipating questions about market penetration and ROI projections. The constant mental juggling was exhausting, and she could feel cracks forming in her carefully constructed life. After dropping Ethan off, 3 minutes late, despite her promises, Sarah made it to her office with barely enough time to review her slides once more. The presentation went well, better than expected, actually. The board seemed impressed with her innovative approach to their new product launch, and Janet gave her an approving nod from across the conference table. But success came with a price. As Sarah wrapped up the meeting, Janet pulled her aside. "Excellent work today," Janet said, her tone businesslike but warm. "The board is talking about expanding the digital division, and your name keeps coming up for the VP role." Sarah felt a surge of excitement. This was what she'd been working toward for years. "However," Janet continued, and Sarah's heart sank slightly, "the position will require additional travel, probably 20% more than your current schedule. Client meetings in San Francisco, New York, maybe even some international work. Can you handle that kind of commitment?" Sarah's mind immediately went to Ethan, to soccer games she'd miss, to school plays she wouldn't attend, to bedtime stories she wouldn't read. But this opportunity might not come again. "Absolutely," she heard herself say. "That won't be a problem." Janet smiled. "Good. We'll talk more next week." As Sarah returned to her office, her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Working late again? Can you pick up Ethan from after-school care?" Of course he was working late. And of course she'd have to rearrange her afternoon to accommodate his schedule. Again. By the time Sarah collected Ethan from the school's extended care program, it was nearly 6 p.m. The guilt was eating at her. Ethan was one of the last kids to be picked up again, and she could see the understanding but tired look in his teacher's eyes. "Rough day?" asked Mrs. Chen, Ethan's favorite after-school supervisor. "You could say that," Sarah replied, signing the pickup sheet. "Thanks for staying with him." "He's a good kid," Mrs. Chen said gently. "But he's been asking a lot lately, when you and his dad will be able to pick him up earlier." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She looked at Ethan, who was gathering his belongings with the resigned efficiency of a child who'd learned not to expect his parents to be available. That evening, as Sarah helped Ethan with his homework while simultaneously responding to work, emails, the weight of everything finally crashed down on her. She was failing at the delicate balance she'd thought she could maintain. Something had to give. When Marcus finally came home at 9:30 p.m., after Ethan was already asleep, Sarah was waiting in their kitchen, nursing a glass of wine and staring at her laptop screen without really seeing it. "How did the Henderson prep go?" she asked, trying to keep her tone neutral. Marcus loosened his tie and grabbed a beer from the stainless steel refrigerator. "Long, but productive. Morrison thinks we have a solid case." He paused, seeming to notice her expression for the first time. "Everything okay?" Sarah closed her laptop slowly. "We need to talk." The conversation that followed was one they'd been avoiding for months. Sarah explained about the potential promotion, about the increased travel, about her growing frustration with being the default parent, while Marcus pursued his career with single-minded determination. "I'm not saying your work isn't important," she said carefully, "but I can't keep being the only one who adjusts their schedule for Ethan." Marcus sat across from her at their dining table, running his hands through his hair, a gesture she recognized as his way of processing stress. "You're right," he said finally. "I know you're right. But this Henderson case, if we win, I'm looking at senior partner within 2 years. That's financial security for all of us. And if I get this promotion, it's career advancement I've worked toward for a decade," Sarah countered. "Why does your ambition always take precedence?" They talked in circles for another hour, neither willing to fully compromise, both feeling the weight of choices that seemed to have no perfect solutions. Finally, Marcus suggested something that would change everything. "What if we got help?" he said. "Real help. A nanny who could handle the pickup, dinner, homework, someone who could give us both the flexibility we need." Sarah had considered it before, but always dismissed the idea. The cost, the logistics, the discomfort of having a stranger in their home. But as she looked around their beautiful house, with its expensive furnishings and pristine surfaces that never seemed to stay clean for more than a day, she realized that all the material success meant nothing if they were too stressed to enjoy their life together. "It would have to be someone experienced," she said slowly. "Someone with excellent references." "I'll handle it," Marcus said, and for the first time in weeks he seemed energized by something other than work. "I'll find someone perfect." Looking back, Sarah would remember this moment as the turning point, the decision that set everything in motion. At the time, it felt like a reasonable solution to an impossible problem. She trusted Marcus completely. They'd built a life together based on mutual respect and shared goals. Why wouldn't she trust him to find the right person to help care for their son? But trust, Sarah would soon learn, could be a dangerous thing when placed in the wrong hands. And sometimes the help we think we need becomes the very thing that destroys us. As they went to bed that night, Sarah felt hopeful for the first time in months. They had a plan. Marcus would find a qualified nanny, she could pursue her promotion without guilt, and Ethan would get the attention he deserved. It seemed like a perfect solution. She had no way of knowing that within 2 weeks her perfectly ordered world would begin to crumble, and the man she'd trusted with her career, her home, and her child's safety would reveal himself to be someone she'd never really known at all. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Marcus threw himself into finding a nanny with the same intensity he brought to his legal cases. Within days, their home office looked like a war room, with printed resumes spread across his mahogany desk, background check, reports stacked in neat piles, and a whiteboard covered with potential interview times and reference contact information. Sarah watched from the doorway one evening, impressed despite herself. When Marcus focused on something, he was thorough to the point of obsession. It was one of the qualities that had made him successful in law, and one of the traits that had first attracted her to him in college. "Find anyone promising?" she asked. Stepping into the room, Marcus looked up from his laptop, his reading glasses perched on his nose. "Actually, yes. I've narrowed it down to 5 candidates. All have extensive experience, clean background checks, and stellar references." He handed her a folder containing the finalists. Sarah flipped through them, noting the professional headshots and detailed work histories. There was Miranda Chen, a former teacher with 15 years of childcare experience, Rebecca Thompson, who'd worked for several diplomatic families, Anna Rodriguez with a degree in child psychology. Each resume was impressive, almost intimidatingly so. "These all look great," Sarah said. "When do we start interviews?" "That's the thing. Marcus said, leaning back in his leather chair. "I already interviewed them. Yesterday and today during my lunch breaks." Sarah felt a flicker of annoyance. "Without me. You were in back-to-back meetings, and I knew you wanted to move quickly on this." Marcus's tone was defensive. "I recorded everything on my phone so you could review them tonight." It wasn't unreasonable, Sarah told herself. Marcus often made decisions for the family when she was swamped at work, but something about being excluded from the hiring process for their son's caregiver bothered her. "Which one did you like best?" she asked, setting the folder aside. Marcus's expression shifted, becoming more animated. "Actually, there was someone else. Someone who wasn't on my original list but came highly recommended by Jim Morrison at the firm." Sarah raised an eyebrow. Jim Morrison was Marcus's senior partner, a man whose opinion carried significant weight in Marcus's world. "Her name is Elena Vasquez," Marcus continued, pulling up a different file on his computer. "She worked for Jim's brother's family in Houston for 3 years. Their son had behavioral issues, and she worked miracles with him." He turned the laptop screen toward Sarah. The woman in the photo was striking, probably in her late 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a neat bun and intelligent brown eyes. She had high cheekbones and a warm smile that somehow managed to look both professional and approachable. "She doesn't have a formal degree in childcare," Marcus admitted, "but her experience speaks for itself. Jim says his nephew went from failing grades and constant tantrums to honor roll and perfect behavior in just 6 months." Sarah studied the photo more carefully. Something about Elena's eyes drew her in. They seemed to hold depth and understanding that went beyond her years. "What happened with the Houston family?" Sarah asked. "The father got transferred to Singapore. They wanted to take Elena with them, but she has family here in Texas she couldn't leave." Marcus clicked to the next page of Elena's file. "She's been doing part-time work since then, but she's looking for a full-time position with the right family." The references were indeed impressive. Glowing recommendations from 3 different families, each praising Elena's patience, creativity, and almost intuitive understanding of children's needs. One mother had written, "Elena didn't just care for our daughter. She transformed our entire family dynamic." "She sounds almost too good to be true," Sarah said, though she was already feeling drawn to the idea of Elena joining their household. "That's what I thought," Marcus agreed. "So I did extra background checks. Everything came back clean. No criminal history, excellent credit, even spoke to her former employers personally." Sarah was impressed by Marcus's thoroughness, but also slightly unnerved by how quickly he'd moved. "When did you interview her?" "This afternoon." "She was—" Marcus paused, searching for the right words. "Remarkable, really remarkable. She has this way of listening that makes you feel like you're the only person in the world. And when I showed her Ethan's picture, she asked such insightful questions about his personality, his interests." There was something in Marcus's tone that Sarah couldn't quite identify. Enthusiasm, certainly, but something else too. Admiration. She pushed the thought away. Marcus was just excited about finding a solution to their childcare problem. "I'd like to meet her myself," Sarah said. "Of course. I've already arranged for her to come by tomorrow evening. She wants to meet Ethan before making any commitment," which I thought was a good sign. The next evening, Sarah left work early for the first time in weeks. She wanted to be present for Elena's visit, to get her own read on the woman who might become such an integral part of their lives. Elena arrived at exactly 6 p.m. as scheduled. When Sarah opened the front door, she was struck by how the photo hadn't quite captured Elena's presence. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she radiated a kind of calm confidence that was immediately appealing. "Mrs. Martinez," Elena said, extending her hand with a warm smile. "I'm so pleased to meet you." Her handshake was firm, but not aggressive, and her voice carried a slight accent that Sarah couldn't place. perhaps Mexican, but refined by years of education and professional work. Please, call me Sarah. Come in." Elena stepped into their foyer, and Sarah watched as she took in the space without seeming to judge or calculate. Many people who entered their home for the first time seemed either intimidated by the obvious, wealth, or covetous of it. Elena simply observed as if she were noting details that might be relevant to caring for a child in this environment. Marcus appeared from the kitchen, and Sarah noticed how his face lit up when he saw Elena. "Elena, welcome back. Sarah, I told you she was impressive." They settled in the living room, with its panoramic view of Lake Travis. Elena sat comfortably but attentively, her hands folded in her lap. She was dressed professionally but not formally. Dark slacks and a cream-colored blouse that was elegant without being flashy. "I'd love to hear about your experience with children," Sarah began, though she'd already read Elena's extensive file. Elena's response was thoughtful and detailed. She spoke about the different families she'd worked with, the unique challenges each child had presented, and her philosophy of childcare that emphasized understanding each child's individual needs rather than applying one-size-fits-all solutions. "Children are like puzzles," Elena said, her eyes growing distant for a moment. "Each piece has to be understood and placed carefully. You can't force the wrong piece into place and expect a beautiful picture." The metaphor resonated with Sarah, who'd been struggling to understand Ethan's recent mood changes and academic challenges. "Speaking of which," Sarah said, "would you like to meet Ethan? He's upstairs doing homework." Elena's face brightened. "I would love to." They found Ethan at his desk, bent over a math worksheet with the intense concentration he brought to everything he deemed important. When Sarah knocked on his doorframe, he looked up with the slightly annoyed expression of a child interrupted, in the middle of a complex problem. "Ethan, honey, I'd like you to meet someone. This is Miss Elena." Elena stepped forward, but not too close. Sarah noticed how she seemed to instinctively understand the right distance to maintain, close enough to seem interested, far enough to avoid overwhelming him. "Hello, Ethan," Elena said. "Your parents tell me you're working on math. What kind of problems are you solving?" Most adults, Sarah realized, would have asked Ethan simple questions about his age or grade level. Elena's question assumed intelligence and showed genuine interest in what he was actually doing. Ethan straightened up, clearly pleased to be taken seriously. "Multiplication word problems. They're kind of tricky because you have to figure out what the question is really asking." "That's very true," Elena agreed, moving slightly closer as Ethan gestured to his worksheet. "Math is like detective work sometimes. You have to look for clues." Over the next 20 minutes, Sarah watched in amazement as Elena engaged with Ethan. She didn't talk down to him or try to take over his homework. Instead, she asked thoughtful questions that helped him think through problems himself, offered gentle encouragement when he got frustrated, and even made him laugh with a clever joke about stubborn numbers that refused to behave. Most remarkably, Ethan seemed completely comfortable with her. Her shy, sometimes anxious son was chatting easily about his favorite subjects, his soccer team, and his plans for an upcoming science fair project. When they finally left Ethan to finish his homework, Sarah felt a sense of relief she hadn't experienced. In months, this could actually work. Back in the living room, Marcus was practically glowing. "Elena, that was incredible. I've never seen Ethan warm up to someone so quickly." Elena smiled modestly. "He's a wonderful boy, very intelligent and curious. He just needs someone who understands that children think differently than adults, not..." Less carefully, Sarah found herself nodding. This was exactly what Ethan needed, someone who saw his intensity as a strength rather than a challenge to be managed. "I have to ask," Sarah said, "you seem almost too perfect for this position. Why haven't you been snapped up by another family already?" For just a moment, something flickered across Elena's face. It was too quick for Sarah to identify. Sadness? Regret? But then Elena's warm smile returned. "I've been very selective," she said. "I only work with families where I feel I can make a real difference. When Mr. Martinez described your situation, your family dynamics, I knew this was where I was meant to be." The way she said it sent a small shiver through Sarah. It was exactly what any parent would want to hear, but something about Eleanor's certainty felt almost predetermined. Marcus leaned forward eagerly. "So, you're interested in the position?" "Very much so," Elena replied, turning to Sarah. "If you'll have me." Sarah looked at Marcus, who was nodding enthusiastically, then back at Elena. Everything logical told her this was the perfect solution. Elena was experienced, professional, clearly gifted with children, and available immediately. Ethan had connected with her instantly, which was rare for her sometimes withdrawn son. So why did she feel a tiny knot of unease in her stomach? "When could you start?" Sarah heard herself asking. "Monday, if that works for your family." It was Friday evening. 3 days to adjust to the idea, to prepare Ethan, to set up Elena's workspace and schedule. "That would be perfect," Marcus said before Sarah could respond. "Absolutely perfect." As they discussed salary, schedule, and house rules, Sarah found herself studying Elena more carefully. The woman was attentive, asked all the right questions, and seemed genuinely excited about the opportunity. But there was something else there, too. Something Sarah couldn't quite put her finger on. An intensity that went beyond professional interest. When Elena finally left that evening, after spending another 15 minutes chatting with Ethan about his rock collection, Marcus was euphoric. "She's incredible, isn't she?" he said as they watched Elena's car disappear down their long driveway. "I told you she was remarkable." "She does seem wonderful," Sarah agreed, though the small knot of unease remained. "Almost too wonderful." Marcus turned to her, frowning. "What do you mean?" Sarah struggled to articulate her feeling. "I don't know. Maybe I'm just not used to things going this smoothly. But doesn't it seem like she was exactly what we needed, appearing at exactly the right time?" "Sometimes good things happen," Marcus said, putting his arm around her shoulders. "Sometimes we get lucky." But as they headed back into the house, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that luck had nothing to do with it. Elena's arrival felt less like chance and more like design. She pushed the thought away. Marcus was right. Sometimes good things did happen. And maybe, after months of struggling to balance everything, they deserved a little good fortune. What Sarah didn't know was that Eleanor's appearance in their lives wasn't coincidence at all. And the references Marcus had checked so carefully, the background reports that had come back clean, the glowing recommendations from previous employers, none of it was what it seemed, but that truth was still hidden, waiting to reveal itself in the most terrifying way possible. Elena's first week was nothing short of miraculous. Monday morning arrived with an unprecedented sense of calm in the Martinez household. For the first time in months, Sarah didn't wake up to the sound of her alarm with a knot of dread in her stomach. Instead, she found herself looking forward to the day ahead, knowing that Ethan would be in capable hands. Elena arrived at exactly 7:30 a.m., dressed in comfortable jeans and a soft blue sweater that somehow managed to look both casual and put together. She carried a canvas bag that Sarah would later learn contained an impressive array of educational games, art supplies, and healthy snacks that she'd carefully selected based on Ethan's interests and dietary needs. "Good morning, Sarah," Elena said with that same warm smile that had won them over during the interview. "Is Ethan awake?" "Just getting dressed," Sarah replied, marveling at how Elena's presence seemed to automatically lower the stress level. In the room, Coffee? That would be lovely, thank you. As Sarah prepared Elena's coffee, black with just a touch of sugar, exactly how she'd requested during their initial meeting, she found herself observing the new nanny more closely. Elena moved through their kitchen with respectful familiarity, not presuming to open cabinets or drawers, but clearly noting where things were located for future reference. When Ethan bounded downstairs, his backpack already organized, and his shoes actually tied correctly, Elena greeted him with genuine enthusiasm that didn't feel forced or overly cheerful. "Good morning, Ethan. Are you ready for another adventure in second grade?" "We're doing science experiments today," Ethan announced, clearly excited. "Mrs. Peterson says we're going to make volcanoes." "Real volcanoes?" Elena asked with theatrical amazement. "Will there be lava?" Ethan giggled, and launched into an enthusiastic explanation of baking soda and vinegar reactions. Sarah watched from the kitchen island, sipping her coffee and feeling something she hadn't experienced in months, the luxury of observing her son's joy instead of managing his schedule. Marcus appeared, looking more relaxed than he had in weeks. His usual morning routine of rushed coffee and frantic email checking had been replaced by an actual breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast that Elena had somehow prepared while entertaining Ethan and organizing his school supplies. "Elena, you're a magician," Marcus said, settling into his chair with a plate of perfectly cooked eggs. "How did you manage all this?" Elena's laugh was musical. "Practice and early rising. I've been up since 5:30 planning the day." Sarah felt a small pang of inadequacy. When was the last time she'd been up early enough to make Marcus breakfast? When had she last had the mental space to plan anything beyond getting through the immediate? "Crisis at hand. You don't need to cook for us," Sarah said quickly. "That wasn't part of the job description." "I know," Eleanor replied simply, "but I like taking care of people. It's who I am." The school drop-off was a revelation. Instead of the usual rush of grabbing forgotten homework and arguing about coat requirements, Elena had everything ready 20 minutes early. She'd even packed extra snacks in case Ethan got hungry after lunch, and she'd somehow convinced him to bring his jacket without a single negotiation. "Have a wonderful day learning," Elena told Ethan as he hopped out of her silver Honda Civic. "I'll be here when school ends, and we can work on that robot you mentioned last night." Ethan beamed, and actually hugged Elena goodbye, something that usually took him weeks to feel comfortable doing with new people. Sarah, following behind in her own car on her way to work, felt a mixture of relief and something else she couldn't quite identify. Jealousy? No, that wasn't right. Ethan deserved to have someone who could give him that kind of attention. But there was something unsettling about how quickly and completely Elena had stepped into the role Sarah had been struggling to fill. The first few days passed in a blur of unprecedented efficiency. Sarah's work schedule suddenly became manageable because she wasn't constantly fielding calls from school or worrying about pickup times. Marcus seemed more relaxed during their evening conversations, no longer rushing through dinner to review case files. Most remarkably, Ethan was thriving. His homework was completed before Sarah even got home. But more than that, he seemed genuinely excited about learning. Eleanor had somehow turned math practice into detective games and reading time, into dramatic performances. She'd organized his room with a system that actually made sense to his 7-year-old brain, and she'd established routines that felt like play rather than chores. "She's incredible with him," Sarah told her best friend Claire over lunch on Thursday. I thought I knew my own son, but Elena seems to understand him in ways I never did." Claire, a fellow working mother who'd been through her own childcare struggles, nodded knowingly. "Sometimes it takes an outside perspective to see what we're too close to notice. Plus, she's not carrying all the other stress you are. She can just focus on Ethan." It was a fair point, but it didn't entirely explain the transformation Sarah was witnessing. Elena wasn't just caring for Ethan, she was anticipating his needs in ways that seemed almost intuitive. She'd somehow figured out that he worked better with background music, that he needed a 5-minute transition warning before switching activities, and that his apparent defiance was often just confusion about unclear instructions. "Where did Marcus find her again?" Claire asked. "Through his boss. She worked for his brother's family in Houston." Sarah paused, realizing she'd never actually spoken to any of Elena's references directly. Marcus had handled all of that. "The recommendations were outstanding." "Well, it sounds like you hit the jackpot. Maybe you can finally focus on that promotion without guilt." But even as Sarah nodded in agreement, something nagged at her. The transformation was almost too complete, too fast. Children didn't usually adapt to new caregivers this quickly, especially children like Ethan, who tended to be cautious and slow to warm up to strangers. That evening, Sarah decided to observe more carefully. She came home earlier than usual, telling Elena she'd forgotten some files she needed for the next day. In reality, she wanted to see the dynamic between Elena and Ethan when they thought they were unobserved. What she found was a scene of domestic perfection that felt almost staged. Ethan was sitting at the kitchen counter, working on a science project while Elena prepared what looked like a gourmet snack. Classical music played softly in the background, and the entire scene had an almost ethereal quality to it. "Mom!" Ethan called out when he noticed her. "Look what Elena taught me." He demonstrated a complex origami fold that resulted in a perfect paper crane. Sarah was impressed. Origami required patience and fine motor skills that Ethan had always struggled with. "That's beautiful, honey," Sarah said, though she found herself studying Elena's reaction more than Ethan's accomplishment. Elena was watching Ethan with an expression of such intense focus that it momentarily took Sarah aback. It wasn't the fond attention of a caregiver. It was something deeper, more personal, like she was memorizing every detail of his face, every gesture, every word. "Elena's teaching me lots of things," Ethan continued, oblivious to the adult undercurrents in the room. "Did you know that some people in Japan believe that if you fold 1,000 paper cranes, you can make a wish come true?" "That's a beautiful tradition," Sarah replied, though her eyes remained on Elena, who had now shifted back to her usual warm but professional demeanor. "Maybe we can work toward that goal," Elena said to Ethan, "a little bit each day." There was something about the way she said it, "work toward that goal," that struck Sarah as oddly formal for a conversation with a 7-year-old. But before she could analyze the feeling further, Marcus arrived home, and the moment passed. Dinner that night was another exercise in domestic harmony. Elena had prepared a meal that somehow managed to be both nutritious and appealing to Ethan's picky palate. She'd set the table with an attention to detail that transformed their usual rushed evening meal into something that felt almost ceremonial. "Elena, you really don't need to cook dinner," Sarah said again, though she had to admit the food was exceptional. "We discussed that your responsibilities would focus on Ethan." "I understand," Eleanor replied, "but I noticed that family dinner time was important to you, and I thought I could help make it more enjoyable." It was thoughtful, even sweet, so why did Sarah feel like she was being managed? After dinner, Elena insisted on cleaning up, while Sarah and Marcus helped Ethan with his bedtime routine. As they tucked him in, Ethan made a request that surprised both parents. "Can Elena read me a story tomorrow night?" Sarah felt a sharp pang that she tried to hide. "Don't you want Mommy or Daddy to read to you?" "You can too," Ethan said quickly, clearly not wanting to hurt her feelings. "But Elena does voices for all the characters, and she knows stories I've never heard before." Marcus ruffled Ethan's hair. "Elena can read you stories, buddy, But remember, Mom and Dad love our reading time too. After Ethan was settled, Sarah found Elena in the kitchen, wiping down counters that were already spotless. There was something methodical about her movements, almost ritualistic. "Elena, can I ask you something?" Elena looked up with her usual attentive expression. "Of course." "This is going to sound strange, but have you worked with families in this area before? You seem to know your way around Austin very well for someone who just moved from Houston." For just a fraction of a second, Elena's hands stilled on the counter. Then she resumed cleaning with the same steady rhythm. "I've visited Austin many times over the years," she said, "for work and personal reasons. It's a city that's always felt like home to me." It was a perfectly reasonable answer, but something about Elena's slight hesitation made Sarah file the interaction away for later consideration. That night, as Sarah and Marcus got ready for bed, Marcus was enthusiastic about Elena's first week. "I told you she was remarkable," he said, hanging up his suit jacket with unusual care. "Even Jim Morrison was asking about her today. Apparently his brother is devastated that they couldn't take her to Singapore." "She is wonderful," Sarah agreed, applying moisturizer with more attention than the task required. "Almost too wonderful." Marcus paused in buttoning his pajama shirt. "What do you mean by that?" Sarah considered her words carefully. "Don't you think it's unusual how quickly Ethan bonded with her? He's usually so cautious with new people." "Maybe that's because she's genuinely good with children," Marcus said, a slight edge creeping into his voice. "Maybe she's exactly what our family needed." The conversation felt familiar, Marcus defending a position while Sarah questioned it. But this time, the stakes felt higher. This wasn't about dinner plans or vacation destinations. This was about their son. "I'm not criticizing her," Sarah said carefully. "I'm just observing. There's something about her that feels almost too perfect." Marcus sat on the edge of their bed, his expression softening. "Sarah, we've been struggling for months. Our marriage was strained, Ethan was acting out, we were both overwhelmed. Now suddenly things are working. Maybe instead of looking for problems, we should just be grateful." He was right, of course. Sarah knew she had a tendency to overthink, to look for complications where none existed. It was part of what made her good at her job, but it could also make her needlessly suspicious in personal situations. "You're right," she said, though the nagging feeling remained. "I guess I'm just not used to things going this smoothly." But as Sarah lay in bed that night, listening to Marcus's steady breathing beside her, she found herself thinking about Elena's hands on the kitchen counter. The way they'd stopped, just for a moment, when Sarah had asked about her familiarity with Austin. It was probably nothing. Elena was probably exactly what she appeared to be, a gifted caregiver who'd brought order and joy to their chaotic household. But sometimes, Sarah would later reflect, our instincts know things our rational minds aren't ready to accept. And sometimes, the very perfection we think we want is actually a carefully constructed mask hiding something much darker underneath. The trap was being set, piece by careful piece, and none of them had any idea how expertly they were being maneuvered into position. 2 weeks into Elena's employment, Sarah's promotion became official. Janet called her into the corner office, with the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Austin, and delivered the news Sarah had been working toward for years. "Congratulations, Vice President Martinez," Janet said with a rare, genuine smile. "The board was unanimous. Your leadership on the Johnson account sealed the deal." Sarah should have felt triumphant. This was everything she'd sacrificed for, everything. She'd balanced precariously while trying to maintain her family life. But as she shook Janet's hand and accepted the congratulations from her colleagues, a part of her mind was elsewhere. At home, where Eleanor was picking up Ethan from school, helping with homework, and seamlessly managing the domestic routine that had once consumed Sarah's every waking moment. The new position comes with some immediate changes, Janet continued, pulling Sarah back to the moment. We're sending you to San Francisco next week for the Morrison Industries pitch. It's a 3-day trip, potentially worth $12 million in revenue. Next week. Sarah's mind immediately went to logistics. That's short notice, I know, but Morrison specifically requested you after hearing about your promotion. This could set the tone for your entire tenure as VP. Janet's expression was understanding, but firm. Is the timing a problem? Sarah thought about Elena, about how smoothly the household ran now, about Marcus's recent relaxation and Ethan's obvious happiness. For the first time since becoming a mother, she could accept a last-minute business trip without panic. No, she heard herself saying, no problem at all. That evening, when Sarah announced the promotion and the upcoming trip, the family's reactions were exactly what she would have hoped for just months earlier. Marcus was genuinely proud, immediately opening a bottle of champagne they'd been saving for a special occasion. Ethan, when the news was explained in terms he could understand, seemed excited that his mum had been recognized for being really good at her job. But it was Elena's reaction that stuck with Sarah. The nanny had been preparing dinner when the announcement was made, and she'd turned from the stove with an expression of such intense satisfaction that it momentarily startled Sarah. Not happiness for Sarah's success exactly, but something more personal. As if Elena had been expecting this news, even orchestrating it. Congratulations, Sarah, Elena said, her voice warm. This is wonderful news for your whole family. The way she said your whole family felt oddly inclusive, as if Elena considered herself part of the unit being celebrated. Thanks, Sarah replied, studying Elena's face for clues to that strange moment of satisfaction. But Elena had already turned back to the stove, humming softly as she stirred what smelled like an elaborate pasta sauce. Later that night, as Sarah and Marcus celebrated privately in their bedroom, Marcus brought up something that had been nagging at Sarah's subconscious. You know what's interesting? He said, loosening his tie with the satisfied air of a man whose life was finally falling into place. Eleanor asked about your work schedule yesterday, specifically about any upcoming travel. Sarah paused in hanging up her jacket. She did? Said she wanted to make sure she could adjust Ethan's routine if needed. Very thoughtful, actually. It was thoughtful. So why did it feel like something else entirely? What exactly did you tell her? Marcus shrugged, missing the subtle tension in Sarah's voice. Just that your new position might require more travel, but that we'd give her as much notice as possible. She seemed excited about the possibility of more responsibilities. Sarah filed this information away alongside her growing collection of small, probably meaningless observations about Elena. Individually, none of them meant anything. Together, they formed a pattern she couldn't quite name. The night before Sarah's departure to San Francisco, Elena stayed late to help with Ethan's bedtime routine and to go over the schedule for the next few days. Sarah found herself watching the interaction between Elena and Marcus more carefully than usual. There was nothing inappropriate about their conversation. They discussed Ethan's after-school activities, his upcoming parent-teacher conference, and the grocery shopping that needed to be done. But there was an ease between them that seemed to have developed faster than Sarah would have expected. They moved around each other in the kitchen with the comfortable familiarity of people who'd been sharing domestic space for months rather than weeks. Elena, I can't tell you how much this helps, Marcus said as they reviewed Ethan's schedule. Sarah can focus on her presentation knowing Ethan's in such good hands. Elena's smile was radiant. That's exactly what I want for both of you. To feel free to pursue your careers without worry. Again, that inclusive language, that sense of Elena positioning herself not as an employee, but as a partner in the family's success. Mom, will you call me while you're gone? Ethan asked as Sarah tucked him into bed. "Every night," Sarah promised, kissing his forehead. "And Elena will take good care of you." "I know," Ethan said with the confidence of a child who'd never doubted his safety. "Elena takes care of everything." The trip to San Francisco was professionally triumphant. Sarah's presentation was flawless. The client was impressed, and the contract was signed within 48 hours. She should have been riding high on professional satisfaction, but she found herself calling home more frequently than necessary. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Marcus would answer, sounding relaxed and happy, reporting that everything was going smoothly. Ethan was thriving, Elena was managing beautifully, and the household was running like clockwork. When Sarah spoke to Ethan directly, he was cheerful and chatty, full of stories about the fun activities Elena had planned and the interesting things he'd learned. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. On her last night in San Francisco, Sarah called home earlier than usual, around 8 p.m. California time, 10 p.m. in Austin. She was surprised when Elena answered Marcus's phone. "Oh, hi, Sarah," Elena said, her voice slightly breathless. "Marcus is just getting Ethan settled. They had such a wonderful day together." "Is everything okay?" Sarah asked, noting something off about Eleanor's tone. "Everything's perfect," Eleanor assured her. "Marcus has been such a devoted father while you've been away. Very attentive to Ethan's needs." There was something in the way Elena emphasized attentive that made Sarah's stomach tighten. But before she could analyze the feeling, Marcus took the phone. "Hey, honey," he said, his voice warm and familiar. "How did the final presentation go?" As they talked, Sarah could hear Eleanor in the background, moving around what sounded like the kitchen, humming that soft, tuneless melody she'd noticed before. It was such a domestic scene, Marcus chatting with his wife while the nanny cleaned up after a family dinner. But something about it felt wrong in ways Sarah couldn't articulate. When Sarah returned home the next evening, she was greeted by another scene of domestic perfection. The house was spotless, dinner was ready, and Ethan launched himself into her arms with the enthusiasm of a child who'd missed his mother but hadn't been traumatized by her absence. "Mom, Elena taught me how to make origami butterflies, and Dad helped me build a fort in the living room, and we went to the park twice." As Ethan chatted about his adventures, Sarah noticed Eleanor and Marcus exchanging a look over his head. It was brief, probably meaningless, but it felt like shared satisfaction in a job well done, like they were co-parents celebrating a successful few days of managing their child together. "Sounds like you had a wonderful time," Sarah said, still holding Ethan but watching the adults. "Elena, I can't thank you enough for going above and beyond while I was away." "It was my pleasure," Elena replied. "Marcus is such a wonderful father. It's been a joy to support him." The way she said support him sent another small chill through Sarah, but Ethan was pulling her toward the kitchen to show her the elaborate dinner Elena had prepared, and the moment passed. Later, after Elena had gone home and Ethan was asleep, Sarah tried to process her discomfort with Marcus. "How was it really?" she asked as they got ready for bed. "Any problems?" "None at all," Marcus said, and he seemed genuinely relaxed. "Elena was incredible. She anticipated every need, managed Ethan's schedule perfectly, even helped me with some meal planning. I don't know how we managed without her." Sarah felt a stab of something, jealousy, inadequacy, at Marcus's obvious admiration for Elena. "She seems very invested in our family." Marcus paused in brushing his teeth. "Is that a bad thing?" "No, of course not. It's just—" Sarah struggled to find words for her unease. "Sometimes it feels like she's trying to be more than a nanny." "What do you mean?" "I mean, she seems to want to be involved in every aspect of our lives. The cooking, the household management, even our work schedules. Don't you think that's a little unusual?" Marcus rinsed his mouth and turned to face her. "Sarah, she's trying to do a good job. We hired her to help with Ethan, but she's naturally observant and helpful. Would you prefer someone who did the minimum?" It was a fair question, and Sarah couldn't articulate why Elena's helpfulness felt intrusive rather than welcome. But as she lay in bed that night, listening to Marcus's contented breathing, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in their household dynamic while she was away. The next morning brought the first real crack in Elena's perfect facade. Sarah was running late for work. A conference call had been moved up an hour, and she'd forgotten her presentation materials in the home office. She rushed back into the house, expecting to find Elena and Ethan in the kitchen having breakfast. Instead, she found the kitchen empty and heard voices coming from upstairs. Following the sound, she discovered Elena in Marcus's study, sitting at his computer, while Ethan played quietly on the floor nearby. "Elena!" Sarah called from the doorway. Elena spun around, her face showing the first genuine surprise Sarah had ever seen from her. For just a moment, she looked like someone who'd been caught doing something she shouldn't. "Sarah, I thought you'd left for work. I forgot some files. What are you doing?" Elena's recovery was smooth, but not quite smooth enough. "Oh, Ethan wanted to show me the pictures from your vacation last summer. He said they were on Mr. Martinez's computer. It was plausible. Ethan did love looking at family photos, and Marcus did keep their picture library on his desktop computer. But something about Elena's explanation felt rehearsed. "The pictures are actually on my laptop," Sarah said carefully, "in the cloud. Marcus doesn't have them on his work computer." Elena's smile flickered for just a moment. "Oh, well, we were just exploring then. Ethan is so curious about technology." Sarah looked at her son, who was indeed absorbed in building something with blocks, seemingly oblivious to the adult conversation. When she looked back at Elena, the nanny was already closing the computer and standing up. "We should get ready for school anyway," Elena said brightly. "Come on, Ethan, time to brush your teeth." As they left the study, Sarah remained behind, staring at Marcus's computer. The screen was locked, requiring a password she didn't know. Marcus had always been protective of his work files, which made sense given the sensitive nature of his legal cases. But Elena had been using the computer, not just showing Ethan pictures. What had she really been doing? That evening, Sarah mentioned the incident to Marcus, trying to keep her tone casual. "Elena was using your computer this morning, said she was showing Ethan vacation pictures." Marcus looked up from his dinner, fork halfway to his mouth. "That's odd. I don't keep personal photos on my work computer." That's what I told her. Marcus set down his fork, his expression thoughtful. Maybe she was confused about which computer had the photos, or maybe Ethan asked about something else entirely. It was possible. Children often made requests that adults misinterpreted or remembered incorrectly. But combined with all of Sarah's other observations, the incident felt more significant than a simple misunderstanding. "Marcus," Sarah said carefully, "have you noticed anything unusual about Elena lately?" "Unusual how?" Sarah struggled to put her concerns into words that didn't sound paranoid. "I don't know. Sometimes it feels like she's too interested in our personal lives, our schedules, our work, our relationship." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering. When he spoke, his voice was measured. "You know what? Now that you mention it, she has been asking a lot of questions. About my cases, about your travel schedule, about our routine when she's not here." He paused. "I assumed she was just being thorough." "What kind of questions about your cases?" "Nothing confidential," Marcus said quickly. "Just general things. How often I work late, whether I bring work home, that sort of thing." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "Marcus, that's not normal nanny behavior." "Probably not," he agreed, though he still sounded uncertain. "But maybe she's just curious. Some people are naturally interested in other people's lives." But as they finished dinner in thoughtful silence, both of them were beginning to acknowledge what Sarah had been sensing for weeks. Elena's presence in their home was shifting from helpful to something else entirely. Something that felt less like employment and more like infiltration. The question was, what did Eleanor really want from their family, and how far was she willing to go to get it? The answers, Sarah would soon discover, were more terrifying than anything she could have imagined. The decision to install security cameras wasn't made lightly. Sarah had wrestled with the idea for 3 sleepless nights after the computer incident, feeling like she was betraying Elena's trust while simultaneously acknowledging that her maternal instincts were screaming warnings she could no longer ignore. It was Marcus who ultimately convinced her. "Look," he said on Thursday evening as they sat in their bedroom, voices lowered to avoid being overheard. "Maybe we're being paranoid, but what if we're not? What if something is really off about Elena? Wouldn't you rather know for sure?" Sarah nodded, though the decision still felt heavy with implications. "If we're wrong about this, then we'll see Elena being wonderful with Ethan, and we can put our minds at ease," Marcus finished. "But if we're right," he didn't need to complete the thought. If they were right, their son was in danger from someone they'd invited into their home, someone they'd trusted with the most precious thing in their lives. Marcus handled the installation himself, claiming he wanted to upgrade their home security system after a recent break-in in their neighborhood, a lie that came surprisingly easily to him. The cameras were small, modern devices that could be monitored remotely through a phone app. He placed them strategically, one in the kitchen, one in the living room, one in the hallway outside Ethan's room, and one in his study. "The feeds will go to both our phones," Marcus explained as he showed Sarah the app interface. "Motion activated with 24-hour recording capability." Sarah stared at the small screen showing different angles of their home, feeling like she'd crossed some invisible line into paranoia and surveillance. "I can't believe we're doing this. We're protecting our son," Marcus said firmly. "That's what parents do." The cameras went live on Friday afternoon. Elena arrived for work as usual at 7:30 a.m., greeting Ethan with her customary warmth, and Sarah with that bright professional smile that now felt somehow calculated. Everything proceeded normally. Breakfast, school preparation, the usual morning routine that had become so efficient under Elena's management. It wasn't until Sarah was at work, reviewing quarterly projections in her new corner office, that she decided to check the camera feeds for the first time. What she saw initially relieved her. Elena was in the kitchen, preparing what looked like a nutritious lunch for later. Her movements were calm and purposeful, exactly what Sarah would expect from a competent caregiver preparing for the day ahead. But as Sarah watched, something strange happened. Elena stopped what she was doing and walked directly to where the camera was hidden behind a decorative plant on the kitchen counter. For a long moment, she stared directly into the lens with an expression Sarah had never seen before, calculating, almost amused. Then Elena smiled, a slow, knowing smile that sent ice through Sarah's veins. It wasn't the warm, professional smile Sarah was used to. It was the smile of someone who knew exactly what was happening and found it entertaining. Elena couldn't possibly know about the cameras. Marcus had installed them after she'd left the previous evening, and they'd been careful to place them in locations that weren't obvious. But Elena was looking directly into the kitchen camera, as if she were greeting an old friend. Sarah's hands trembled as she called Marcus. "You need to check the kitchen camera," she said without preamble when he answered. "What's wrong?" "Just look. Now." Sarah stayed on the line, while Marcus pulled up the app. She could hear his sharp intake of breath when he saw what she was seeing. That's not possible," Marcus said slowly. "There's no way she could know about the cameras." But Elena was still standing there, still staring into the lens with that unsettling smile. Then, as they watched, she raised her hand and gave a small, almost playful wave directly to the camera. "Marcus," Sarah whispered. "She knows." Elena turned away from the camera and resumed her lunch preparation as if nothing had happened. But the damage was done. Whatever game Elena was playing, she was now playing it openly. "I'm coming home," Sarah said. "No, wait," Marcus replied, his lawyer's mind apparently clicking into gear. "If she knows about the cameras, let's use that. Let's see what she does when she thinks we're watching." It was a reasonable strategy, but Sarah felt sick to her stomach. The woman they'd trusted with their son was clearly not who she appeared to be, and now she was taunting them through their own surveillance system. The rest of the morning passed in a surreal haze. Sarah tried to focus on work while periodically checking the camera feeds on her phone. Eleanor's behavior seemed normal. She did laundry, organized Ethan's room, prepared dinner ingredients. But there was a deliberateness to her movements now, a sense that she was performing for an audience. At 11:47 a.m., Elena did something that made Sarah's blood freeze. She walked into Marcus's study, the room where Sarah had found her using his computer, and sat down at his desk. This time, she made no pretense of having Ethan with her or looking for family photos. She opened the computer, entered what appeared to be a password, and began systematically going through files. Sarah called Marcus immediately. "She's in your office," Sarah said, her voice tight with controlled panic. "She's going through your computer files." "What? That's impossible. My computer requires a password, and I never—" "Marcus, she just typed in a password like she knew it. She's looking through your files right now." There was a long pause. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was grim. "I'm coming home." "Should I call the police?" "Not yet. We need to understand what's happening first. And we need to make sure Ethan is safe." Sarah's next call was to Westlake Elementary. "This is Sarah Martinez, Ethan's mother," she said when the school secretary answered. "I need to confirm that Ethan is still at school and hasn't been picked up early for any reason. Let me check." "Yes, Mrs. Martinez. Ethan is in his classroom. Is everything all right?" "Yes, just please don't release him to anyone today except my husband or myself, not even to Elena." "Of course, we'll make a note in his file." Sarah hung up feeling marginally better. At least Ethan was safe at school. But what was Elena looking for in Marcus's files, and how had she gotten his password? The answer to the second question came 40 minutes later when Marcus called back, his voice shaken. "Sarah, I think I know how she got into my computer." "How?" "I've been thinking about this, about all the questions she's been asking, all the interest she's shown in my work. Last week, when you were in San Francisco, she brought me coffee while I was working in the study. I stepped away to take a phone call, and when I came back, she was still there, organizing some papers for me." Sarah felt sick. "She saw you enter your password. More than that, I think she's been systematically gathering information about us from the beginning. Our schedules, our routines, my work files, probably our financial information too. But why? What could she possibly want?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I don't know yet, but Sarah, I just realized something else. The Henderson case, the one that's been consuming all my time. The client is worth about $50 million, and if he loses this case, he could face criminal charges that would destroy him financially. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow." "You think Elena is working for the other side?" "I think Elena might not even be Elena." When Marcus arrived home 20 minutes later, Eleanor greeted him with her usual warm smile, as if she hadn't spent the morning rifling through his confidential legal files. "You're home early," she observed pleasantly. "I hope everything's all right." "Actually, Elena, we need to talk," Marcus said, his voice carefully controlled. Sarah arrived 10 minutes later to find Marcus and Elena sitting in the living room, the atmosphere thick with tension. Elena's demeanor had shifted subtly. She was still smiling, but the warmth had been replaced by something sharper, more calculating. Elena, Sarah said, taking a seat across from the nanny, we installed security cameras yesterday. Elena's smile didn't waver. I know. The casual admission hung in the air like a challenge. You know? Marcus repeated. Of course I know. I've known about your suspicions for weeks. You're not nearly as subtle as you think you are. Eleanor's voice was still pleasant, but there was steel underneath now. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Sarah felt like she was in a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. Who are you? Eleanor laughed, a sound that bore no resemblance to the gentle amusement Sarah was used to hearing. I'm exactly who I said I was. Eleanor Vasquez, experienced childcare provider, excellent with children. Everything I told you was true. Then why were you going through my computer? Marcus demanded. Because you have something my employer wants, Elena replied simply. Information about the Henderson case that could be very valuable to the right. The pieces were falling into place with horrifying clarity. You're a spy, Sarah said. I prefer information specialist, Elena corrected. And I'm very good at my job. Your son adores me. Your household runs more smoothly than it has in years, and I've gathered everything my employer needs to ensure that Marcus's client loses his case spectacularly. Marcus stood up abruptly. You need to leave. Now. Eleanor remained seated, completely calm. I don't think so. You see, I've grown quite attached to this family, to Ethan especially. He's such a sweet boy, so trusting, so innocent. It would be a shame if anything happened to disrupt his sense of security. The threat was delivered in the same gentle tone Elena had always used with Ethan, which somehow made it even more chilling. If you think we're going to let you continue, Sarah began. You're going to let me continue because you don't have a choice. Elena interrupted. I have copies of every file on Marcus's computer, including some very sensitive client information that I'm sure the Texas Bar Association would find interesting. More importantly, I have Ethan's complete trust. Do you really want to explain to a 7-year-old why the person he's come to love and depend on suddenly disappeared from his life? Sarah felt trapped in a waking nightmare. Elena was right. Ethan had bonded with her completely. Removing her abruptly would be traumatic for him, possibly damaging in ways they couldn't predict. What do you want? Marcus asked, his voice hollow. Elena's smile returned, bright and terrible. I want to continue being Ethan's nanny. I want to continue living in this beautiful home, being part of this lovely family, and I want Marcus to provide me with regular updates on the Henderson case until it's resolved. And if we refuse, Elena's expression didn't change, then I'll be forced to find other ways to get what I need, ways that might be less pleasant for everyone involved. The meeting ended with Elena calmly returning to her duties, preparing Ethan's after-school snack as if they'd just discussed weekend plans, rather than extortion and threats. Sarah and Marcus were left staring at each other across their living room, realizing that their home had been invaded not by a burglar or a stranger, but by someone they'd welcomed with open arms. We have to call the police, Sarah whispered. Marcus shook his head grimly. With what evidence? She's right about the client files. If this gets out, I could lose my license, and she hasn't actually done anything illegal that we can prove. She threatened our son. Implied threats, nothing explicit enough to build a case on. Sarah sank into her chair, overwhelmed by the realization that they were trapped. Elena held all the cards, access to Marcus's confidential files, Ethan's emotional attachment, and the knowledge that any attempt to expose her would destroy Marcus's career and traumatize their son. But as Sarah sat there, feeling helpless and manipulated, a cold anger began to build inside her. Elena might think she was in control, but she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd revealed herself too early, and now that Sarah knew who Elena really was, she was going to find a way to stop her, no matter what it took. The next 72 hours were the longest of Sarah's life. Elena continued her charade of being the perfect nanny, maintaining her cheerful demeanor with Ethan while simultaneously holding the Martinez family hostage with her web of threats and stolen information. The most disturbing part wasn't Elena's transformation from caregiver to blackmailer. It was how seamlessly she maintained both roles. When Ethan was around, Elena was exactly the same warm, attentive person who had won their hearts weeks earlier. But the moment he was out of earshot, her mask slipped, revealing cold calculation and barely concealed satisfaction at her control. Over their lives, Sarah found herself studying Elena with new eyes, wondering how she'd missed the signs that now seemed so obvious. The way Elena's smile never quite reached her eyes when she thought no one was looking. How she always seemed to know just a little too much about their schedules and routines. The questions that had felt like caring interest, but were actually intelligence gathering. Monday morning brought a development that made Sarah's blood run cold. As she watched the kitchen camera feed from her office, she saw Eleanor pull out a small device, no bigger than a thumb drive, and connect it to her laptop. For 20 minutes, Elena worked with focused intensity, occasionally glancing toward the camera with that same knowing smile. Sarah called Marcus immediately. "She's downloading something," Sarah whispered into her phone, as if Elena could somehow hear her through the camera feed. "Some kind of data transfer." "From what?" "I don't know, but Marcus, what if she has access to more than just your work computer? What if she's been going through our personal files too? Bank accounts, credit cards, Ethan's school records." The silence on Marcus's end was answer enough. They'd been so focused on protecting his legal files that they hadn't considered how much other sensitive information Elena could have accessed. During her weeks in their home, "I'm hiring a private investigator," Marcus said finally. "We need to know who Eleanor really is and who she's working for." "What about the police?" "Not yet. If Elena's as connected as she seems, involving law enforcement too early could backfire. We need leverage of our own first." That evening, as Sarah helped Ethan with his homework while Elena prepared dinner, she forced herself to act normal despite the tension that felt thick enough to cut. Ethan, thankfully, seemed oblivious to the undercurrents, chattering happily about a science project on weather patterns. "Elena's going to help me build a tornado in a bottle," he announced proudly. "She knows how to make the water spin really fast." Sarah glanced at Elena, who was stirring pasta sauce with the same serene expression she'd worn while admitting to corporate espionage 3 days earlier. "That sounds like fun, honey," Sarah managed. "Elena knows about lots of things," Ethan continued. "She knows about different countries and languages, and even about computers. She's teaching me how to code." This was news to Sarah. "Coding?" Elena looked up from the stove, her smile picture perfect. "Just basic programming concepts. Children Ethan's age are remarkably quick learners when it comes to technology." The casual mention of teaching Ethan about computers sent another chill through Sarah. Was Elena grooming her son to help with her information gathering? Or worse, was she preparing him to be useful to her in other ways? After dinner, as Elena supervised Ethan's bedtime routine with her usual gentle efficiency, Sarah and Marcus retreated to their bedroom to discuss the call Marcus had received from the private investigator. "Her name isn't Elena Vasquez," Marcus said quietly, checking to make sure their bedroom door was closed. "At least that's not the name she was born with. The real Elena Vasquez died in a car accident in Houston 6 months ago." Sarah felt the room spin slightly. "Who is she?" The investigator is still working on that. "But get this, the references I called, the families she supposedly worked for, 2 of them don't exist, and the 3rd family says they never employed anyone named Elena. But the Houston family you mentioned, Jim Morrison's brother," Marcus's expression was grim. "I called Jim today. His brother's family has never employed a nanny named Elena. In fact, his nephew has never had behavioral problems. Jim has no idea what I was talking about." Sarah sat down heavily on their bed. Then how did she know to mention Jim's name? How did she know enough details to make the story believable? That's what scares me. She's done extensive research on us, on our connections, on our vulnerabilities. This isn't a random scam, it's a targeted operation. The implications were staggering. Someone had researched their family thoroughly enough to craft an identity that would appeal specifically to them. They'd known about Marcus's relationship with Jim Morrison, about their childcare struggles, probably even about Sarah's career ambitions. "Marcus," Sarah said slowly, "what if this isn't just about the Henderson case? What if we're not just collateral damage in some corporate espionage scheme?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if we were targeted specifically? What if someone wanted access to our home, our lives, our son for reasons we don't understand yet?" The thought hung between them like a toxic cloud. If Sarah was right, then Elena's presence in their home wasn't just professional theft. It was personal invasion, of the most intimate kind. Tuesday brought fresh horrors. Sarah, now obsessively monitoring the camera feeds, watched Elena spend an hour in Ethan's room while he was at school. She wasn't cleaning or organizing. She was photographing everything: his artwork, his school papers, his personal belongings. She even went through his dresser drawers, examining clothing labels and taking pictures of items that seemed to have no obvious value. But it was what Elena did next that made Sarah's hands shake as she reached for her phone. Elena pulled out what looked like a professional camera with a long lens and began photographing pages from Ethan's diary, the little journal where he wrote about his daily activities and feelings. Sarah was calling Marcus before she'd even processed the full implications. "She's documenting everything about Ethan," Sarah said, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "His room, his belongings, his private thoughts. Marcus, this isn't corporate espionage. This is something much worse." "I'm coming home." "No. Wait, she'll know we're watching if you leave work suddenly again. But Marcus," Sarah's voice broke slightly, "I think we need to get Ethan out of there, tonight." When Marcus arrived home at his usual time, he found a scene of domestic normalcy that now felt like an elaborate stage production. Elena was helping Ethan with a math worksheet while a pot roast filled the house with savory smells. To any observer, it would have looked like the perfect family scene. But Marcus now knew he was looking at a predator who had spent the day systematically cataloguing his son's most private spaces and thoughts. "Elena," Marcus said, his voice carefully controlled, "could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Elena looked up with that same bright smile. "Of course. Ethan, keep working on those multiplication problems. I'll be right back." In the kitchen, away from Ethan's hearing, Marcus confronted Elena directly. "I know what you did today, in Ethan's room." Elena's smile didn't waver. "I'm not sure what you mean." The photographs, going through his personal belongings, reading his diary. For a moment, Elena's mask slipped completely. Her eyes turned cold, calculating, almost predatory. "You really shouldn't spy on people. Marcus, it's not polite. Neither is photographing a child's private possessions." Elena moved closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Ethan is a very special little boy, so bright, so trusting. Someone could learn a lot about your family just by observing him." The threat was clear, even if the words were vague. Elena wasn't just gathering information about Marcus's legal cases. She was building a comprehensive profile of their entire family, with Ethan as the focal point. "What do you want?" Marcus asked. "I want what I've always wanted," Elena replied. "To be part of this family, to take care of Ethan, to make sure he's safe." The way she said safe made Marcus's skin crawl. It wasn't a promise of protection. It was a threat disguised as concern. That night, after Elena had gone home to whatever lair she emerged from each morning, Sarah and Marcus made a decision that would change everything. "We're leaving," Sarah said as they lay in bed, speaking in whispers even though they'd checked every inch of their bedroom for listening devices. "Tonight, we're taking Ethan and going to your parents' house in San Antonio. What about Elena? She'll know we're gone." "Let her know. Maybe if we're not here, she'll reveal her true agenda. And maybe we'll finally have enough evidence to go to the police." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Sarah, if we run, we look guilty. If Elena really does have copies of my confidential files, then we'll deal with that later. Right now, I'm more worried about what she might do to Ethan if we don't get him away from her." They agreed to leave early the next morning before Elena arrived for work. They would tell Ethan they were taking a spontaneous vacation to visit his grandparents. A believable story that wouldn't alarm him. But as Sarah lay awake planning their escape, she couldn't shake the feeling that Elena was somehow ahead of them, that whatever game she was playing, she'd already anticipated their moves. At 3 a.m., Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Running away won't solve anything. Ethan needs stability. I provide that. Think carefully about what's best for your son." Sarah's blood turned to ice. Elena not only knew they were planning to leave, she had Sarah's private cell phone number and felt confident enough to threaten them directly. A second message arrived moments later, this one including a photo that made Sarah's heart stop. It was a picture of Ethan sleeping in his bed, taken from an angle that could only have been captured from inside his room. The timestamp on the photo was 2:47 a.m., just 16 minutes earlier. Elena was in their house, right now, while they slept. Sarah shook Marcus awake, showing him the messages. Without speaking, they crept down the hallway toward Ethan's room, Marcus grabbing a baseball bat from their closet. Ethan's door was slightly ajar, which was wrong. They always closed it completely at bedtime. Through the crack, they could see a figure sitting in the chair beside Ethan's bed, silhouetted in the dim light from his nightlight. Elena turned toward them as they approached, her face eerily calm in the shadows. "He's such a peaceful sleeper," she whispered. "I'd hate for anything to disturb his rest." In her lap was Ethan's favorite stuffed animal, a worn teddy bear he'd had since infancy. But Elena was holding something else too, something that glinted in the low light, a syringe. "Elena," Marcus said carefully, raising the baseball bat slightly, "you need to leave, now." Elena stood slowly, still holding the syringe. "I don't think you understand the situation, Marcus. I'm not leaving, and neither are you." "Mom? Dad?" Ethan's sleepy voice cut through the tension. "What's happening? Elena, why are you here so late?" Elena's demeanor immediately shifted back to the warm caregiver persona. "Hello, sweetheart. I came to check on you because I was worried. But everything's fine now." Sarah realized with horror that Elena had positioned herself perfectly between them and Ethan, close enough to their son that any aggressive move could put him in danger. "What's in the syringe?" Sarah asked quietly. Elena's smile was serene. "Just something to help everyone stay calm while we figure this out. Children can be so frightened by adult conflicts." The standoff stretched for endless seconds. Ethan, confused but not yet alarmed, looked between his parents and Elena. Marcus gripped the baseball bat, but couldn't risk using it with Elena so close to their son. Sarah felt paralyzed by the nightmare scenario of having a dangerous stranger, holding a syringe mere feet from her child, and Elena, still smiling that terrible knowing smile, held all the power. "Now," Elena said softly, "why don't we all go downstairs and have a nice chat about how we're going to move forward as a family?" It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Sarah realized that Eleanor had never intended to simply steal information or blackmail them for money. She had come to take Ethan. Everything else had just been preparation for this moment. The next 20 minutes unfolded like a carefully choreographed nightmare. Elena herded the family downstairs to the living room, maintaining her gentle demeanor with Ethan while keeping the syringe clearly visible to his parents. She moved with the confidence of someone who had planned this moment down to the smallest detail. "Ethan, sweetie, why don't you sit on the couch with Mommy and Daddy?" Elena suggested, her voice as warm as ever. "I want to tell you all a special story." Ethan, still confused but beginning to sense the tension in his parents, climbed onto the couch between Sarah and Marcus. Sarah wrapped her arms around him, feeling his small body trembling slightly. Elena took the armchair across from them, placing the syringe on the coffee table where everyone could see it, a clear reminder of the power she held. "The story," Elena began, "is about a little boy who lived far away with his mommy and daddy. A very special little boy who was loved very much." Sarah's blood froze. This wasn't a random fairy tale. Elena was talking about a real child. But one day, Elena continued, her voice taking on a strange, distant quality, "some bad people took the little boy away from his mommy. They said his mommy wasn't taking good care of him, but that wasn't true. His mommy loved him more than anything in the whole world." Marcus shifted slightly, trying to position himself to grab the syringe if he got the chance, but Eleanor's eyes immediately fixed on him, and she shook her head with that same serene smile. "The mommy tried everything to get her little boy back," Elena continued. "She went to courts and lawyers and police, but none of them would listen. They said she was unstable, but she wasn't unstable. She was just heartbroken." The pieces were clicking into place with horrifying clarity. Elena wasn't working for corporate rivals or foreign governments. This was personal, devastatingly, obsessively personal. "Elena," Sarah said carefully, "what happened to the little boy in your story?" Elena's smile faltered for the first time all evening. "He was given to new people, people who had lots of money and big houses and could give him things his real. Mommy couldn't, but they didn't love him the way his real mommy did. And the mommy?" Marcus asked quietly. "The mommy decided she would find another little boy to love, a little boy who needed her, who would appreciate how much she cared." Eleanor's gaze shifted to Ethan, who was pressed against Sarah's side. A little boy, just like Ethan. Sarah felt the world tilt beneath her. "You lost a child." "I didn't lose him," Elena snapped, her composure cracking slightly. "He was stolen from me, but I found a way to get my family back." "Elena," Marcus said, his voice gentle despite the terror coursing through him, "taking Ethan won't bring your son back?" "Ethan will be my son," Elena replied with frightening certainty. "I've been preparing for months. I know everything about him. His favorite foods, his bedtime routine, his fears and dreams. I can give him love and attention that you two are too busy to provide." Sarah's mind raced, looking for a way out of this nightmare. Elena was clearly unhinged, but she was also methodical and prepared. The syringe on the table wasn't an empty threat. It was part of a plan that Eleanor had been refining for months. "What's your real name?" Sarah asked, hoping to buy time while she figured out how to get help. "My name is Carmen Reyes," Elena replied, "and my son's name was Miguel. He would have been 8 years old this month." The past tense hit Sarah like a physical blow. Carmen's son wasn't just missing, he was dead. "Carmen," Sarah said softly, "I'm so sorry for your loss. But Ethan isn't Miguel. He has a family who loves him." Carmen's laugh was bitter. "You love your careers more than you love him. I've watched you for weeks. You're always rushing, always stressed, always putting work first. Ethan deserves better." "You're right," Sarah said, surprising everyone, including herself. We have been too busy. We have been putting work first. But that doesn't mean we don't love him. Love isn't enough, Carmen replied. Miguel's father said he loved him too. But when child services came, he chose his new girlfriend over his son. When the foster family was chosen, they chose the people. With money over the people with heart. Sarah could see the pain driving Carmen's delusion, but that didn't make her any less dangerous. If anything, it made her more unpredictable. "What's your plan?" Marcus asked bluntly. "You can't just disappear with Ethan. We'll call the police. There will be an investigation." Carmen's smile returned, cold and confident. "You won't call the police because you can't afford to. I have enough evidence of your professional misconduct to destroy both your careers. And besides," she picked up the syringe, "by the time anyone realizes what happened, Ethan and I will be somewhere very far away, living as mother and son." "Where?" Sarah demanded. "Mexico, initially. Then perhaps Costa Rica or Guatemala, places where a single mother traveling with her son won't attract attention. I've been preparing new identities for both of us." Sarah felt sick. Carmen had thought of everything. She'd spent months not just infiltrating their family, but planning an escape route that would make finding them nearly impossible. "Ethan won't go with you willingly," Marcus said. "He'll be terrified, confused. He'll cry for us." Carmen's expression softened, becoming almost maternal. "Children are resilient. With time and patience, Ethan will understand that I'm the one who truly cares for him. And if he needs help adjusting," she gestured to the syringe, "there are ways to keep him calm during the transition." Sarah couldn't take it anymore. The thought of Carmen drugging Ethan, kidnapping him, and potentially harming him in pursuit of her twisted grief was unbearable. "You're insane," Sarah said, her voice shaking with rage and fear. Carmen's demeanor changed instantly, her face hardening into something truly frightening. "I'm not insane. I'm a mother who lost everything and found a way to heal. But if you can't see that, if you're going to fight me," she picked up the syringe, "then you're not the kind of parents Ethan needs anyway." It was Marcus who moved. First, while Carmen was focused on Sarah, he lunged forward, grabbing for the syringe. But Carmen was ready for him. She pivoted away from his reach and back toward the staircase, still holding the weapon. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," Carmen said, her voice eerily calm despite the chaos. "Ethan, come to me, sweetheart. We need to go now." But Ethan, who had been silent throughout the confrontation, finally spoke up. "I want to stay with Mommy and Daddy," he said, his voice small but clear. "I don't want to go with you." Carmen's face crumpled for a moment, revealing the broken woman beneath the controlled exterior. "You don't understand, baby. I can take better care of you. I can love you the way you deserve." "But I love my Mommy and Daddy," Ethan replied with the simple honesty of childhood. "This is my home." And that's when Sarah saw her chance. While Carmen was emotionally reeling from Ethan's rejection, Sarah managed to grab her phone from the coffee table and dial 911. 911, what's your emergency?" "There's an armed intruder in my home," Sarah said loudly, making sure Carmen could hear every word. "She's threatening my family and has a weapon. Please send police immediately to 847 Lakeview Drive in Lakeway." Carmen stared at Sarah with a mixture of rage and betrayal. "You've ruined everything," she whispered. "Everything I worked for, everything I planned." "The police are coming," Sarah said firmly. "It's over, Carmen. Put down the syringe and surrender." But Carmen wasn't finished. With the desperate fury of someone who had nothing left to lose, she made one final, terrifying move. "If I can't have Ethan," she said, raising the syringe, "then no one can." She lunged toward Ethan, but Marcus was ready. He tackled Carmen before she could reach their son, sending both of them crashing to the floor. The syringe flew across the room. its contents spilling harmlessly onto the carpet. Sarah grabbed Ethan and ran toward the front door, her son crying in her arms as the sounds of struggle continued behind them. They made it to the driveway just as police sirens became audible in the distance. When the officers arrived, they found Carmen Reyes restrained on the living room floor, screaming about injustice and stolen children while Marcus held her down. The investigation that followed revealed the true scope of her deception and obsession. Carmen had indeed lost a son. Miguel had died in a car accident 18 months earlier, an accident that had also killed her husband. Unable to cope with her grief, she'd become fixated on the idea that she could replace her lost family by taking someone else's. She'd spent months researching the Martinez family, crafting the perfect identity and backstory to gain access to their home and their son. The stolen identity of Elena Vasquez was just one part of an elaborate plan that included forged references and fake employment records and carefully constructed lies designed to appeal specifically to Marcus and Sarah's needs and vulnerabilities. In the end, Carmen was charged with breaking and entering, attempted kidnapping, identity theft, and multiple counts of harassment and stalking. She was sentenced to 15 years in prison, with mandatory psychological treatment. For the Martinez family, the healing process was longer and more complex. Ethan required months of therapy to process the trauma of discovering that someone he'd trusted had been planning to hurt him. Sarah and Marcus went through their own counseling, both individual and couples therapy, to address the guilt and paranoia that lingered long after Carmen was locked away. But they also made changes, real changes. Sarah negotiated a reduced travel schedule that allowed her to be more present for Ethan's daily life. Marcus restructured his practice to ensure he could attend school events and bedtime routines. They learned to prioritize their family time in ways they never had before. Most importantly, they learned to trust their instincts. Sarah's initial unease about Elena had been right all along. The perfection that had seemed too good to be true was exactly that, a carefully constructed lie designed to manipulate their desperation for help. Years later, when Ethan was old enough to understand what had happened, Sarah would tell him the most important lesson she'd learned from their ordeal, that the people who truly care about you will never make you choose between love and fear. Real care nurtures and protects. It doesn't manipulate or control. And sometimes the most important thing a parent can do is listen to that small voice inside that says something isn't right, even when everything else seems perfect, especially then. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.